So if we've got this church year, how do we put that into a practical relationship in terms of worship? Well, it means that when we put it together in worship, we need to have some system or some structure in which to do that. And the structure which the church has developed is a thing called the lectionary. The lectionary. And the lectionary is really a system which tries to take that church year and all those different events within the church year, and then to choose passages of scriptures or lections, so sections of the scripture from the Old Testament, from the epistles, so that's the different letters, and then from the Gospels, and usually a psalm for every week as well. And what they try and do is to put those together and to choose them so that they fit within the particular time of the year, so that it helps us to present that. And that's the same thing we can do when we're designing and planning worship, that we can use the lectionary and the church year to help us say, well, how can I help people connect with that time of the year? How can I help them connect with Advent? So the question that can be there can be, how can I help the people prepare for celebrating Christmas? Not just getting the Christmas gifts and making sure that they've got the turkey and the ham, but rather to say, how can I help them to understand what it means to prepare for the incarnate Christ, for God to come and be with us? Or maybe the period that's before Easter, which is called Lent. How can we get that Lenten period to actually be a period of preparation to remember the sacrifice of Jesus, but also the wonder in terms of giving us life? That the angel of death again would pass over us and we would have a life. Not just any life, not just a length of living, but rather a quality of living that is fundamentally different. How would we get that? Well, those are the things that we can do and what we need to plan into our worship if our worship is going to be meaningful. Because remember that times and seasons and events are so meaningful to us as human beings. We remember birthdays. And we remember anniversaries. And we remember the first time something happened or the time when that particularly impacted upon me. We remember those events because we are people based in time. And so when you design and develop worship, to put that worship that you're doing and base it into the time, a time of the year, a cycle of the Christian year and the church year, those things make that more meaningful and connect people to what you're doing. Not only for the worship service in terms of the preaching, but that in fact the hymns and the prayers and all those different components of the service begin to work together to help enhance the concept of time and of church year. One way to use that then is by using something like a lectionary. Now there are many lectionaries. There's many different kinds of lectionaries. There's some that focus on telling a whole story each week all the way through. There's some that try and bring out a particular letters of Paul. There's others that are trying to do a number of different things. But the one that's used most universally around the world is called the RCL, or the Revised Common Lectionary. It was finally published in 1994. In 1994, the Revised Common Lectionary came out. And it really was a lectionary that was trying to get people to read as much of the scripture as possible, so that in fact they would have as a majority of the scriptures within it. Each week you would have a scripture for the New Testament, for the Old Testament, you'd have a scripture for the epistles, you'd have a scripture for the Gospels, and a psalm. And it also worked on a 3-year cycle. So you would have 3 years of RCL. You would have a year A, a year B, and a year C. And each year would have its own discrete readings for those special events, but also for the rest of the year, those proper period, that period where in fact there weren't any particular events, there was just growth and deepening of our relationship with God. These A, B, and C were also based on the Gospels themselves. And so the year A was based in Matthew and Matthew's Gospel. Year B was based on Mark's Gospel, and because Mark is so short, it also added some pieces of John's Gospel to it. And then year C was based in Luke's Gospel. And so you can see that the focus of the RCL was to make sure that people had read the Gospels. And so by the end of 3 years, if you followed just the gospel reading alone, you would have read almost 90% of all the gospels. However, of course, you would have read much less of the Tanakh, or the Old Testament. Much less of that. What you would have read are only pieces or sections of it. It's one of the reasons why some people don't like the RCL, is because it actually leaves out some of those really fundamental Old Testament stories. Even things like, for example, David and Goliath. The story isn't in the RCL. So if you want to preach on that, you would have to add it specially. However, I want to encourage you to look at the lectionary, to encourage you to think about how we can put together the readings that we have and connect them to the worship we do, and connect that to the church year and the events on life of the church as we do it.